It's Monday, it's 12:15 and Keir Starmer is reshuffling his Downing Street team. Can it help restore the government's fortunes? This is Politics Live. Also today, anger over asylum hotels. Will tighter immigration rules deter people from coming in the first place?
It's got to change, it's got to be overturned. So we will come out twice a week if need be, and we will be here again and again and again until something's done.
I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza.
That was back in July. Now a decision looms. Should the UK government recognise a Palestinian state? Joining us today, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Labour's Emily Thornberry, Shadow Scotland Secretary Andrew Bowie, Elva Ray from Bloomberg UK, and The Telegraph's Tim Stanley. Now, as I was saying in the headlines there, Keir Starmer is reshuffling his number 10 team. MPs, of course, back at Westminster today after the summer break. You can follow everything that's going on with that reshuffle on the BBC News website. You can see the live page there with all our correspondents feeding in the information, and you can follow that throughout the day. But do that later, because right now we can find out exactly what is going on from our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, who joins me now from Westminster. So, Henry, first day back for MPs and some changes going on. Tell us what's happening.
Yeah, some pretty significant changes, Vicky. Lots of MPs, certainly lots of ambitious, relatively new Labour MPs, were hoping for, perhaps even expecting, a reshuffle of junior government ministers. That's not quite what we've got. What we've got is a really significant reshaping of who works in the engine room of Downing Street, who works in Sir Keir Starmer's Downing Street team. Some of them civil servants, some of them advisors. But now that team has at the core of it an MP. That's very unusual. This morning, Darren Jones was the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Now, he is the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, tasked with delivering Sir Keir Starmer's priorities across government. And if anyone at home is wondering who was previously the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, it's not a job that has ever existed before. And I think what's significant there is by inaugurating this new role and asking a relatively senior MP to do it, I think it is a recognition from Sir Keir Starmer that as it stood, his team was just not working well enough.
And that's what I was going to ask you, really, Henry. What is the problem here that he's trying to fix? Because there are other people moving on, and they're people, actually, that Keir Starmer himself appointed.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people are saying, as we've often said about Sir Keir Starmer, that this shows how ruthless he is. But, you know, when you are ruthlessly dispensing with or sidelining people who you yourself appointed less than a year ago, then some people might draw other conclusions. I mean, there's actually a few different problems or perceived problems the Prime Minister is trying to solve here. So some of it might look quite mundane, but it's things like creating clearer lines of accountability. There were about 4 people before who could credibly claim to be in charge of Sir Keir Starmer's policy team. Now there is definitively one. Likewise with his communications team, where there are a couple of people sharing that job before. Now he's recalled someone from the Tony Blair days to be in clear charge. There's also beefing up of 10 Downing Street rather than 11 Downing Street's economic know-how. The Prime Minister has hired a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Baroness Shafiq. I mean, that's an incredibly illustrious person to be taking up a role as his chief economic advisor. But I think the key thing here does come back to the Prime Minister wanting to find a better way for his team to deliver his vision across government. Of course, when you speak to lots of Labour MPs, what they say is that's all well and good, but they need a sense of what that vision that the Prime Minister wants delivered actually is.
And Henry, how much is this about the budget, which is still probably a couple of months away, but there's been so much speculation about what might be in it. The fact that there does seem to be an emphasis here on the economic side of things.
I think you can't overstate how big a deal this budget is for this government and how big a deal it is being treated as right at the top of government. So another change that's happened is the Prime Minister's civil service office, the people who speak to him all day, every day, who gatekeep what goes to him and what doesn't, that is now being run by someone who's spent his career previously at the Treasury. I think there's all sorts of things here designed to beef up the Prime Minister's economic heft. And the reason for that is simple. I mean, I was speaking to someone in Downing Street, and they're actually still in Downing Street a few weeks ago, and they said the budget is not just going to be the big moment of the autumn for the Prime Minister, it is going to be the big moment of his first term as Prime Minister, however long that lasts.
OK, Henry, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date there. Emily, is this going to restore the government's fortunes, do you think?
I think it is a mixed bag, isn't it? I think that what Keir Starmer needs to do is be doing as well domestically as he has been doing internationally. So his standing internationally is phenomenal, and he's been making the right decisions, and I think that Britain is back on the international stage, and it's something to be proud of. I think that there has not been the same success when it comes to domestic politics, and beefing up number 10 has got to be part of that. And I think that everyone thinks very highly of Darren Jones, and so if he can give assistance directly to the Prime Minister, that's got to be a good thing. I have to also say I am delighted to see that James Murray has taken his place in the Treasury. James worked for me for 5 years, and he's a very bright lad.
Learned everything he knows from you?
And he learned, I tell you, he learned a great deal from me. And not only does he have a very sort of acute political antenna, he's also universally liked. I mean, that's pretty rare in politics. He's actually a nice bloke, and he listens to people, and he's very articulate. And
but then having the right people,
a more sound appointment.
Having the right people around you is one thing, isn't it? And changing personnel is one thing for Keir Starmer. But surely some of this has got to be about his leadership and his policies.
I think it's also about delivery, and it's about making sure that you have the right priorities and just going for it. So we have to make sure that we have growth, and that growth is growth that people can see and feel themselves because it actually affects them. We have to do something about the asylum crisis, and we need to do something about smashing the gangs. And I just think that we also have to make sure that we secure the future of the NHS. So those seem.
But you think Keir Starmer's he's got the vision. It's about implementing
it's kind of getting on with it. It is getting on with it, and being relentless and ruthless about it, and just going, this is what we have to do.
Does it suggest that Labour weren't really prepared for power, given this churn of personnel?
Oh, come on. I mean, we've been in opposition for 14 years. I mean, you can do everything you can to prepare for power, but clearly, no government walks in straight away ready-made as a perfect government. You have to learn, and you have to be able to move on, and that's what's happening. I mean, every new government does that. I'm sure even Andrew would accept that that happens.
Andrew?
I mean, yes, that does obviously happen. But what we're seeing today is interesting for two reasons. One, I think removing Darren Jones out of Treasury and into number 10 just before the budget shows, to me, a lack of confidence in the Treasury and Rachel Reeves' ability to deliver the significant changes that are going to be necessary in the economy to deliver economic growth for the country. I think there's a feeling that number 10 wasn't as involved as it maybe should have been in some of the big economic decisions that were taken in the first few months of this government, blindsided by the reaction to the winter fuel allowance decision, for example. It also strikes me that only 14 months into this government, we're already seeing a shuffling of the deck chairs and a real acknowledgement that they have been unable to get their message across. Now, absolutely, I think many of the problems come down to policy decisions, but in terms of landing those policies and trying to convince the general public of their merit, Labour have been completely absent. And this is coming, by the way, at the end of a summer where the government seems to have just vacated the field. I mean, there have been little or to no announcements domestically over the summer, which I do think was a mistake for them. So panic, I think, in number 10, and a significant lack of confidence in Rachel Reeves' ability to turn the economy around, seeing number 10 taking a much firmer grip on economic affairs.
Elva, is that how you see it?
I think those questions that you asked, Henry, about what problems are Keir Starmer trying to solve here is kind of the right way of looking at it. What clues can you glean about what he's going to correct after a first year that really has not gone very well? I think Andrew's right that a lot of the issues have been economic decisions, you know, taking cuts, you know, that early winter fuel payment decision set the tone for the whole start of their government. They'll never be able to undo that. That was, you know, the big thing they did in their first 100 days, set a really difficult tone, and then coming again on the welfare cuts, then having to make that big U-turn. The issues have been economic policy making. Now there's this big move to bring heft from the Treasury over to number 10. You can see that is number 10 ahead of this budget, trying to avoid all those decisions. But I also think it's interesting, you know, Henry mentioned that today we were expecting a reshuffle of junior ministers that had been briefed to the papers, and it was described as a revenge reshuffle. And we were kind of basically expecting that junior ministers who had been involved in that welfare rebellion were going to be moved out. Some of it was also going to be about delivery, moving in talent, but some of it was going to be about getting rid of those people who had been really vocal internally that they weren't happy with those welfare cuts. And instead, actually, what we're seeing is the opposite, that Liz Lloyd, who was one of the directors of policy, is moving to a different role in government. James Lyons, Director of Communications, is also leaving. Those are two of the people actually in government who were the most gung-ho on those welfare cuts. And I think that there's a little clue there as to Keir Starmer's diagnosis of what went wrong. He's not wanting to punish the rebels. He's actually removed some of the people who were slowest maybe to listen to those MPs. It's not necessarily that this has moved to the left. You know, Tim Allen, Tony Blair's former communications chief, coming back in as communications chief. You know, he's also kind of a Blairite and on the right. But I think that just there's a clear clue here that Keir Starmer thinks actually we got that welfare vote completely wrong, and I'm not just going to punish the people on the left of the party.
Now, Tim, lots of people will say these aren't exactly household names that we're talking about here, but are you surprised that this sort of churn is happening?
No. Darren Jones is probably the biggest name, and he's quite respected within Westminster. The problem is he's being brought in to deliver the Prime Minister's priorities. Well, he's now got to have an awkward conversation in which he asks Keir Starmer, so what are your priorities? Am I correct that he's been through 4 communications directors in 5 years? Did I read that right? Yeah. So when you're failing to project a vision, when you're failing to communicate well, you can sack lots of people and change them around, but you do reach a point when you have to wonder if that's on you, if it's on the way in which you ran the general election, if it's on you in terms of how you've responded to economic change. Now, Henry was right to point us towards the budget. It is true. We have not heard a lot of new policies from the government, but my goodness, they have floated a few to see how people might react to them.
Quite a lot of speculation over the summer, hasn't there?
We've had the threat of changes to send financing. We've had new taxes being floated, which I suspect they'll have to back down upon because of Angela Rayner, which we haven't got into. So all this is being set up for the budget. And the bottom line is, Rachel Reeves said last year, that tax-raising budget is the last time I want to run a budget like that. Well, given the country's fiscal position, given all these moves, given all the whispers during the summer, it looks like we're going to get a budget that might be even worse. So the government at some point, Keir Starmer's going to at some point going to have to take responsibility for that, not just sack junior people who are responsible for communications.
And Emily, in terms of that, we have seen across the summer lots of speculation about tax rises. Everyone pretty much is expecting tax rises. What do you think the government should be doing?
Oh, look, I have lots of ideas, and I'm quite happy to tell you, but can I just give you the big sort of rider? This is not necessarily government policy. So I think, for example, that capital gains tax should be at the same rate as income tax. I don't see why you should earn money from money without having to graft for it and be paying less tax than those who actually work. So I think, for example, that's actually something that I think, and most countries have that at the same level. I think that would raise quite a lot of money, and that's, I think that, we are in a difficult place because the tax burden is the highest that it's ever been. The debt has been the highest that it's ever been. Public services are on their knees. This is what we inherited from the Conservatives. It is hard, and we need to find a way through it. But one thing is true, is that the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. And actually, we do need, I think, just as a matter of fairness, to be looking again at taxes in relation to
property taxes amongst them.
So, I mean, it's when people the richness is through property. you know, and so I do think we have to look at that. I mean, clearly, in order to have a tax that's going to work, a new tax that's going to work, it'll take a bit of time. So that may not be something that will come out in this budget, but I do think it's something that we should work on. And in the meantime, I think we should introduce an increase in capital gains tax for those with property. I mean, I think, for example, we should look again. Wait a minute, hang on. I've got a few other ideas. I mean,
hang on. Let's just do that. Can we do that one
first? We should also look again at the rates of tax that people pay on properties at local government
levels.
levels.
Okay, let him answer that on capital gains.
The price of properties since 91.
The economic underperformance follows a year of a budget that raised taxes. Are we going to be sitting here in 3-4 years' time after again we've underperformed and after again the government income is in trouble, saying perhaps we should raise taxes a little bit further? What other aspect of life would you like to tax?
I think we have to pay back some of the debt that obviously, you know, this government inherited from the Conservatives, and it is at the highest level ever. And the cost of it, and the amount that it's costing, that it's costing for us to just to service that debt is just not sustainable. So the debt needs to be paid off. And so how are we going to do that? Are we going to cut back on public services that are already on their knees? No. At least I hope not. So what else are we going to do? So I do think we need to look to those that have the broadest shoulders. That is an absolute basic Labour idea.
But the government
those are the broadest shoulders.
The broad shoulders of employers last year.
Have properties and property that is worth a huge amount of money. We should look to them and say it is fair at this time for you to pay more.
Okay,
that's
Andrew,
what I think.
property taxes.
Not necessarily Labour's policy, but you know that's what I think. And
Andrew.
I then think we should look at the amount of local taxes that people pay on the basis of the value of their properties.
Okay,
given
so
that
council tax
reassessment.
reassessment.
Look again at reassessment.
Okay.
I don't know why we don't do that.
Do you agree with do you agree with any of those plans?
Well, no. But what I also think is that, you know, Emily says this is the situation we inherited. The fact is the economy. Yeah, but the fact is the economy is in a far worse situation now than it was when Labour came into office as a direct result of some of the decisions that Labour have taken. The national insurance increase, for example, has led to thousands of people being laid off, unemployment rising, businesses closing across the country. Decisions on non-doms has seen many wealthy individuals who were spending their money and investing in the UK leaving the United Kingdom to other countries overseas. We've seen debt increase, we've seen growth fall.
Hang on,
and the fact was that last year's budget was supposed to, above everything, deliver growth, and it has utterly failed in that regard. So what is Rachel Reeves going to do now? And I think it's for those reasons, given that everything that Rachel Reeves has tried, including the welfare changes over the past year, that Keir Starmer has determined he's going to get a better grip on the situation ahead of this budget than he allowed to be the case last year.
I mean, we're going for growth, but it does take time to ramp it up. You know, and after
a year,
we're growing
faster when we left office than we are now.
You can't just go from zero to
we weren't at zero.
the sort of speed
Emily,
that we need to get to. You need to be able to invest. For example, we have a plan to build 1.5 million homes. We want to be able to transform the way in which we produce energy. This we cannot do overnight, and I appreciate that people are impatient. They say we voted Labour. Why haven't we got everything that Labour promised? You know, but we need time to do it.
So
and it is a long-term plan, and we do need time. We had 14 years of the Tories thrashing around. Now we need to be able to give the Labour government a chance.
Right, let's just bring in Elva here about, well, Emily talking there about property taxes. Yeah. Is any of this politically palatable?
You know, I think...
Rachel Reeves.
I think that Emily's in the right ballpark of what will happen, or my bet would be on a lot of these things. I mean, this is what a huge chunk of the Labour Party wants, but also just the context here is that Rachel Reeves has already ruled out increasing the three main revenue raisers in the UK, income tax, national insurance and VAT. She obviously raised national insurance on employers at the last budget, but so she can't really touch the vast majority of the ways that you raise money through tax. How else are you going to do it? People have been calling for a wealth tax. They kind of haven't ruled that out, but clearly they're not going to do a wealth tax as it's narrowly defined. Clearly where they're going to land is on taxes on the wealthy. So I think capital gains tax would be a good bet. Lots of people are talking about how you tax property. And then, I mean, beyond that, it's sort of, do you look at taxes on various interest groups, a bit like we saw on farmers with inheritance tax. If you can't go for the big broad base, you know, Rachel Reeves really like dancing on
more people.
You end up also national insurance on rental income. I mean, I think that's another thing. So that, you know, if people have a certain, you know, you could say if you own more than 3 properties, then and you're renting out more than 3, then you should pay national insurance on the income you get from that. I mean, that
then
seems to me to be.
what's the point in renting them out? This is the problem. The left always does. The left tries to separate income and wealth, and to say income, we don't want to tax that so much because that stops people striving, but wealth is okay because wealth you just have. It just is there like oxygen. No, wealth in many cases is the product of income. It's why we get income, so that we will have wealth. If you then tax the wealth and destroy it, you discourage people from working hard to get the wealth, but also you have all these perverse effects down in the rest of the economy. So it was floated over the summer, taxing house sales, etc., and things like that, more stuff on what happens with inheritance. The consequence of that will be, well, I just won't sell the house. If you don't just sell the house, then people can't rise up the property ladder. Then someone with a family of four is stuck in a semi because the person with the big house won't sell it because they're frightened of the wealth tax.
I think that what you have to do
briefly answer that, Emily, then we'll move on
these things. In order for us to have, if we were a more equal society, we would be a happier society. And one of the ways in which to make a more equal society is to say, you know, you can own 3 properties, but if you own more than 3 properties and you're renting out more than 3 properties, it would be a good idea to have taxes on your rental income.
No one was having a good time in the Soviet Union. No one's having a good time in North Korea. This is again a fallacy.
This is not North Korea. This is like you can rent out 3 properties, but if you rent out the 4th, then you ought to pay tax on rental income on that. I mean, the good Lord, this is not like storming the... You know.
Right, we will come back to this, I'm sure, many times between now and the budget, but let's just look at what's going to be happening this afternoon in the House of Commons. And the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is going to be announcing some tightening of the rules for migrants. Have a look at this BBC headline. She's going to be saying that migrants who've been granted asylum here, there will be restrictions on bringing their families to the UK. There will be tougher English language standards, for example. People will have to have sufficient funds to support themselves. And she's also going to be talking about reforms to the asylum appeals system. Emily, do you think this is will make much difference? There's clearly been an awful lot of emphasis on immigration over the summer. Do you think that these changes will make a difference?
I think there's no one thing that's going to make a difference. You know, I think we have to do a whole range of different things. And I think that, you know, from having intelligence agreements with different countries like Bulgaria and India, and just actually passing backwards and forwards the information as to what the gangs are up to, about raids to grab the boats, which we have done in Bulgaria and Belgium over the summer. I mean, there's lots and lots of different things that are going on. Making decisions. I mean, you know, 35,000 people have been deported since Labour came in. You know, making sure that we cut back on the backlog. When we were elected, there was the Tories had completely lost control of it, and there were like 26,000 people who were just sitting there waiting for a decision to be made. I mean, I know I've got 2 asylum hotels in my constituency. People will come to my surgery and just say, they're just not making a decision. I just don't know what to do. I feel like I'm just holding my breath, waiting for a decision to be made. You know, I'm living with this trauma that I've been through, you know, as to how I was treated in whichever country they've been to, and then coming here and then just waiting, just nothing. I can't earn any money.
Andrew, what do you say to that? Because there was effectively a pause, wasn't there, in the processing of asylum seekers?
Whilst we were in government, we were ramping up incredibly the investment that we were making in ensuring that the processing was improved. But nobody's going to pretend that the situation was perfect. But the fact of the matter is that at this point, as we sit today, illegal crossings, in terms of people coming across the channel in boats, is at record levels. And one of the reasons for that, Emily, you've had a lot of time speaking to that. One of the reasons for that is the fact that Labour, one of the first decisions they took when they came into government was to remove the deterrent factor, which would have been the Rwanda plan, which was stymied at every stage of the way by Labour members of Parliament, Labour members of the House of Lords, activist judges. We finally got it on the statute book. It's a fact. We finally got it on the statute book. And the first planes were due to take off, but weeks after the general election. And one of the first decisions Labour did was to get rid of that. So right now, there is no deterrence factor. So people can come across the channel knowing that they're not going to be deterred from entering the United Kingdom. That is wrong. And so whatever the Home Secretary announces this afternoon, the fact of the matter is, until there is a deterrent coming to the United Kingdom, people will continue to come in.
She's going to tighten things that you didn't. So why didn't you do that when you were in power?
Well, we were in the midst of improving the situation markedly. We were
all
in the
you
midst
were doing,
of
all you did
bringing
was
forward
try
a
to
deterrent
introduce
factor,
the Rwanda scheme, which was only going to result in 300 people a year being sent back. You put all your eggs in that Rwanda basket, which actually, if you remember, was ruled illegal, and you had given up on everything else, and so there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people just sitting, waiting for decisions to be made. They weren't being returned anywhere. I mean, I will give you this: you had an agreement with Albania for returning people to Albania, and that was an achievement. But frankly, everything else, I mean, it's like even when you left the Europe. Wait a minute. When you left the Europe,
let him respond to that.
But why, Emily? Why did the Labour government? Why was one of the first decisions they took to get rid of the Rwanda scheme? Yeah, okay, fine. The numbers may not have been stratospheric. It might not have been the game changer that we hoped it would have been. But at least you could have given it a try. Why was it just, discarded?
Because it was wrong to send people to another country for another country to make decisions on whether or not someone had the right to have asylum.
But it's exactly
if people come to
the
our
situation
country,
that
we should be making those decisions.
That many other countries around
we should make those decisions, and we should make them faster than we do. Which is why when Yvette Cooper comes today and says that it's going to increase,
why is your government doing one?
Hang on, wait. I'm quite happy to answer any questions people have, but not if there's two at once.
Let's just bring point first. Very briefly, and then we'll bring in Tim.
This is the Emily
very
Thornbury
briefly.
show.
No, sorry. Just if there's, what can I do? I mean, I would much rather there was somebody else on this panel who also wanted to take up Labour's cause, but it's just me. So let me just see if I can answer the points that you're making. So where were we? So what was your question,
Tim? Come on,
so
now's
if
your
you
chance.
don't like Britain sending people over to Rwanda to deal with our asylum problem, why are you happy for France to do it?
Because I think that, before we left the European Union, you may remember, we had this thing called the Dublin Agreement, and if somebody had a decision made in Europe saying that they weren't entitled to asylum...
That's not the one in, one out
wait
with
a minute,
France
then when someone came over to the UK, we were able to send them back. Unfortunately, Boris Johnson, when he negotiated leaving the European Union on Christmas Eve, he didn't actually deal with that at all. So rather than us taking control of our borders, we've ended up with a situation whereby the French are not prepared to take anyone back. Now, we've got this pilot in which we are saying we will return someone, and then someone who has an overwhelming right to come to this country will be exchanged. And in that way, if people are coming and taking the mick, they know that they'll be sent back to France, whereas people who have family here already, and you're putting a Syrian family back together again, then they will have the right to come. Yeah.
I want to bring in, let me just bring in Alva here, in terms of over the summer, we have seen Reform UK and Nigel Farage, really talking about this issue almost every day, haven't they? And this response from Yvette Cooper, do you think this is going to be acceptable to her own MPs? And do you think it's going to fend off Reform UK?
Well, I think that's the problem, really, the way you described it as a response to Farage there, because I think you speak to Labour politicians privately, and I think that I don't think people have a massive problem with this in particular, but I think that they worry that in general the response from the Home Office over the past few weeks has looked quite reactive, because we've had Nigel Farage giving these press conferences every week and really setting the terms of the news agenda. Like, it's not like there was nothing coming out from the Conservatives and the government was still putting out policy positions, but nothing like on the scale of reform. And we've ended up just talking about asylum hotels and sort of the Labour government running from Farage attack lines all summer, really. And I think inside the Labour Party there's a huge amount of frustration about that actually, why can't the government, which is the government, make its own weather? Make a big policy announcement on this or on something else, and then ask Farage whether he would be doing that, ask the Conservatives, ask the Lib Dems, set the conversation in that way. I think the problem is you've had such a bold policy proposal from Farage now that this all looks...
Mass deportations.
Mass deportations, it all looks kind of reactive and small in comparison. It's a really difficult issue, but actually maybe part of the response needs to be not just announcements from the Home Office, but other big, bold policies.
So you're nodding there.
Labour's not really getting to that level.
Do you think the government's being too reactive?
I think the government is largely where the public is on this issue. It tends to just be a couple of steps behind. In fact, I think this is the most right-wing government in my lifetime. If you take, for example, something that Cooper is going to propose today. Right now, if you're a refugee in this country, you can ask for a relative to join you if your application has been accepted. The government is going to say now that person must prove their income and that they can speak English. Now, just think about that. That's a bit odd, isn't it? Say someone is fleeing persecution, they come to this country, of course they want their child or their wife to be with them. That person now has to pass tests which are currently applied to economic migrants. To what extent is that? That just doesn't seem to me to be in the spirit of asylum. And if you take the hotel issue, hotel, by the way, the infamous one in Epping, opened by the Tories, closed by Rob Jenrick and then reopened by the government. If you close all these hotels, as the public is demanding, where do asylum seekers go? They go into the private market, which means they then compete with us for housing. Is the public going to like that? Why do we think that every asylum seeker who is a man is a likely rapist? That's been the tone of the summer's coverage. I found elements of it quite disgusting, actually. There is this assumption within the public that women and children are always legitimate, but anyone who's fleeing persecution who happens to be male of a certain age and who's hanging around the town because, by the way, the government doesn't let them work, that person is immediately to be a suspect. I actually think the debate in this country is moving very far past me as someone who's always argued for immigration controls towards an attitude towards asylum seekers which is deeply unwelcoming and intolerant.
Actually, what do you agree
and
with that?
I actually think Labour, once in a while, I'd like them to say, you know what, it's actually a good thing to grant people refuge, and we're proud of doing that.
What do you think about the tone of the debate, Andrew?
Well, I do find some of the tone of the debate over the summer quite troubling, and I think
what, in the same way as Tim was describing?
Well, and I think we need to be very careful to ensure that legitimate asylum seekers and those seeking refuge from horrific situations overseas still see the United Kingdom as a country that has always been proud to and will continue to sort of lead the way in taking in those that desperately need it.
I mean, are you worried about the tone from some of your colleagues, like Robert Jenrick and others?
No. Well, I would say certainly worried about the tone of people like Nigel Farage and elements on reform, and even to the right of reform, your Tommy Robinson, etc., regarding this situation and the huge following that these people have on social media and how they're influencing the debate.
But
there is an element of fairness.
But it's not just reforms. I mean, Robert
this.
Jenrick talked about the fact he's got a young daughter and wouldn't be happy about having asylum seekers.
And there are people out there in this country who do feel very uncomfortable about large numbers of men from other countries being housed in hotels in the middle of villages and towns up and down length and breadth, and that's something that does need to be addressed. And the concerns of those individuals need to be addressed. And there is an element of fairness here. I mean, how can it be right that there are people coming into this country illegally when there are people jumping through many hoops to come here through legal routes? How can it be right that the taxpayers, to the tune of tens of millions of pounds, funding these asylum hotels? We need to get to grips with this issue. I worry that the government isn't, and I worry that as a result of removing the only deterrence factor that was on the table when they came in, there is still no deterrent to anybody who is seeking to come into the country illegally, and that is a huge worry.
Do you think the way in which the Conservatives continually say that being sent to Rwanda would have been a deterrent is extraordinary, given that essentially they risked their lives by being put onto a tiny little boat and coming across the sea is not a deterrent in itself. I mean, if people have decided they're going to risk their lives by coming over on a blow-up dinghy to the UK,
so
then the possibility of being one of the 500 that you might be sent to Rwanda each year is not really a deterrent.
What it is that it's supposed
to strike in the run-up to an election when you have given up trying to do anything about the asylum crisis that has been created during the 14 years that you were in charge. What we need to have, and surely we all agree with this, we need to have a fair process, a firm one, and one that is fast. And we should measure everything against that and make sure that those who are entitled to get asylum are looked after properly and their decision is made quickly, and if they are not entitled to it, we have to be firm about it and we have to return them, and that is the deal. And
right, we have to just move on now to another subject, but just to say that Reform UK will be on this programme later in the week on Thursday to give their point of view. As we've said, they've been announcing a lot on this over the summer. Have a look at this headline in The Guardian, which is reporting that the Foreign Secretary David Lammy will tell MPs later today that the UK still intends to recognise a Palestinian state in September. Now, back in July, the Prime Minister set out, I suppose you call them, some conditions which he said Israel should meet. Have a listen to what he had to say back then.
I can confirm the UK will recognise the state of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank.
So, Emily, is this the right time now to recognise a Palestinian state?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that point, I mean, he made those conditions, and within 24 hours, the Israeli government, this far-right Israeli government, has said they weren't doing any of that. And so, yes, so we go ahead and we recognise, and we do it with other countries, but we have to do it as the beginning of a new process, a renewed energy that must go into finding a peace and finding a solution and finding a way forward for the Palestinian people and safety and security for the Israelis, and to make sure that we get the hostages back.
Andrew, do you agree with that? It's the right time?
Just one point. I mean, there is aid going into Gaza. There's a big issue and big problem with the distribution of aid within Gaza, but aid is crossing into Gaza and the problem is on the other side of that border. I've just come back from Israel. I was there last week, was privileged enough to meet families of people who've been taken hostage, some of whom are still being held, they believe are still alive, held by Hamas. Visited the Gaza border, went to the West Bank, spoke with officials in the territory there and indeed with Israeli government and indeed opposition figures. And what is very clear, and this is my second trip out there, what is very clear is that the situation in Israel is incredibly complex. The views of the Israeli people are very complex. They're very divided. Netanyahu has huge opposition to him and how he has prosecuted this war within Israel.
But did the Israelis you spoke to, what did they say about the prospect of a Palestinian state being recognised, not just by the UK?
They are very worried about the decision coming now, whilst hostages are still being held.
And are you worried about it? You don't think it's the right time?
I do not think it's the right time. The perception is, whilst hostages are still being held by Hamas, whilst this war is still ongoing, that it is being seen in the region, and indeed has been referenced by Hamas, as a reward for their actions on October the 7th. And I think when there are still families grieving, and I went to a kibbutz, a village where tens of people had been shot, murdered, mutilated in front of their families, others had been taken hostage, for this emotion to still be so raw, whilst individuals' human lives are still at stake within Gaza, for the UK government to take this decision now is being seen by the Israeli people, whatever side of the fence politically they sit on, and indeed by Hamas. And they've said so themselves, as a reward for their actions on October the 7th. And I think that they have said so. Emily, they have said so. Hamas said this is the fruits of our work on October the 7th. A decision to recognise Palestine right now. Now, we believe in a two-state solution. We absolutely believe that's the only way to resolve the issue long term. But whilst this war is raging...
recognise the other state?
Well, because right
it's
now...
a funny old two-state solution where you don't acknowledge one of them's a state.
Right now, whilst there are hostages being held in Gaza,
so
when Hamas says this is a result of our work on October the 7th, that this is being rewarded, I do not believe that in all conscience the United Kingdom should be saying right now that we should be recognised in Palestine without any route to that state being recognised.
Okay,
who will be in charge of that state? Will it be a third party? Will it be a third country? Will the US be involved somehow? Emily might know, apparently Tony Blair has been advising Trump on the future direction of Gaza. Will it be the Palestinian Authority, who have very little grasp of what's going on in the West Bank, let alone being able to take on what's going on in Gaza? We just don't have any detail whatsoever. And until we know the detail and have some of the answers, I don't know how we can legitimately say we recognise a Palestinian state until we know exactly what that state will look like, who will be in charge.
The Labour Party, the context here is that the Labour Party committed before the election to recognising a Palestinian state at some point, that arguing this is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. And actually, anyone who supports a two-state solution does need to have two states being recognised as part of that step. The government's argument has been that they would recognise at the point of maximum leverage. That's what they've been saying the whole time. Speaking to people in diplomatic circles, I think, unfortunately, there's a bit of a recognition that they missed the boat. And the moment of maximum leverage would have been during the last ceasefire. And Starmer and co did not move then. There has now been quite a lot of domestic pressure. And, so without much leverage over Israel, Starmer, the UK and other countries are going ahead anyway. But in terms of actually moving towards the kind of peace process that everyone wants, unfortunately, it might not have that kind of impact that we're hoping for.
It doesn't think it would make any difference?
No, not at all. I think what the Prime Minister said there in that clip it sums up what's wrong with Labour's position, to say we will recognise statehood unless the Israelis do X. Well, if there is a moral case for statehood, it doesn't depend upon what the Israelis do. Either it is a state, so granted a statehood, or not. But then what Andrew said about, yes, 2 states, but not right now, that sort of sums up the world's position for the last 60-odd years. Yes, at some point in the future, a 2-state solution, but we can't do it right now because we don't like, for very good reasons, the current Palestinian leadership. Ultimately, what matters is what America wants to do. They are the people who bankroll this, they're the people who make this possible, and Trump is close to Netanyahu, and although he is happy to bring peace in the Congo and claim to bring peace in Ukraine, he doesn't seem to be committed to it in this case. So I'm afraid the rest of the world is just watching on while this continues, and whatever we say probably doesn't matter a great deal.
On that note, let's look at the Washington Post, which reported yesterday on a post-war plan for Gaza, which is apparently circulating in the White House, that involves the US paying Palestinians to leave Gaza. This would be part of a proposal for the US to take over the territory for 10 years and rebuild it. Emily, what do you make of that plan? And as Andrew said there, the suggestion that Tony Blair has been in the White House talking to Donald Trump about what happens if, it's a big if, the war ends.
It's wrong on so many different levels. It's wrong on the basis of it being in breach of international law. It's wrong morally. It won't work politically. It's just, I mean, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. You cannot say the solution to this is to move a whole population. We have words for that, and there's law against that, and that I can't do. It won't do. So what needs to happen is, I mean, Tim's right. You know, we do need to have the Americans on board on this, and we do need to make sure that Donald Trump's attention is caught.
Do you think he's listening to what people are telling him?
No, not at the moment. But I think that it can be done. I think my own view has always been, ever since Donald Trump was elected, was that actually potentially it's an opportunity, in that if we put before Donald Trump, we say to him, look, there's this intractable problem, but actually there is a way forward, but we need you to use your strength and your influence on the Israelis to make sure that we go in the right direction. And we will, as your trusted friends, go off with your Arab allies and people in the region, and we will put together a peace plan. And we need you to push this forward. And, you know, you want a peace prize, you'll get a peace prize for this. And that's what we need to do.
Do you think that's what Tony Blair is doing? Do you know what his role is in all of this?
I don't know what Tony Blair is.
Do you think he should be involved?
I don't know what his role is. I mean, obviously, he's got a long history in the region, but, you know, we do need to do it in the framework of a 2-state solution. And there is no other one which works. And, you know, I have said many times, whenever I've met an Israeli politician, I've always said, how do you see Israel in 10 years' time? What next? What next for Israel? I've not got a serious answer from people. You know, if they can come up with an alternative solution, then fine. Let's hear it, but we don't get it.
I don't entirely disagree with what Emily's saying. I mean, you asked the question, what happens the day after, and it's very difficult to get any real answer to that. What is admittedly a very complex question, but in terms of the plan that I read about this morning, huge logistical, political, and indeed, as Emily says, moral questions surrounding that, not least how the American people would feel if they were the ones guaranteeing the security of Gaza during this transitional period. It wasn't that long ago that the American public demonstrated quite clearly what they felt about American boots being on the ground in the Middle East, and didn't end well. So there are many, many questions to be asked about this. I don't think, frankly, this plan really is a serious one. I think it's a non-starter, but it's a plan, and we need to have discussions about what does happen next. So let's start having those debates and discussions. And Tony Blair has got...
obviously Donald Trump's coming to this country in 3 weeks or so. I mean, 2 weeks or so. Is it, Alva? Sorry, is it a serious plan?
Well, I think that there was a good piece in The Guardian on this a few weeks ago, that Donald Trump has a strong enough relationship with Keir Starmer that he has kind of quietly allowed him, which is a weird phrase, kind of quietly allowed him to take a different position on Gaza and to pursue recognising a Palestinian state, even though that is not the US position. I think actually on this visit, this is something that the UK government won't really want to talk about with Trump. They will want to prioritise other things, making progress on trade and sort of moving Trump's position on Ukraine, getting more security guarantees. This one, they're not on the same page, and I think that they've just sort of accepted that.
Tim, do you think there's any influence that they can have on Donald Trump?
I think Trump has an idea in his head of turning Gaza into Dubai. I don't think that's such a bad idea. I think the reason why it won't work is because Gazans won't leave, and they won't leave because they don't believe they'll be welcomed back. You often hear people say, why don't Arab countries take Gazans? It's a misunderstanding. They do. There are thousands of Gazans in Egypt, but they won't encourage Gazans to leave because they believe this is a war of settler conquest, rightly or wrongly. And would you take money to go away on the assumption that you will be welcomed back, given the history that you have in that region? That I don't think it'll work, because I don't think the Gazans and the Arab nations will support it.
That's all for today. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:15.